Hey everybody, welcome. I am Trevor Williams with Global Atlanta. It's nice to have y'all here at Constellations. We have an exciting program for you today. We're looking forward to discussing philanthropy and with Kirk Bowman. So I'm going to do some quick introductory remarks and we'll launch into our program and a few just kind of housekeeping issues. You'll see that we are doing this is our first kind of hybrid event with an in-person crowd as well as a virtual audience. So thank you to both of you. We're going to try to please everybody. So logistically, if you notice on your Zoom screen, for those of you who are tuned in virtually, there is a bird's eye view of the crew here. So y'all are on camera. Just make sure you know that. Everybody can wave. How about we wave at all the virtual folks? We don't want to make virtuals second-class citizens. We want everybody to participate equally. At the end of the dialogue, we will have a Q&A discussion. I'm going to walk around and have those here ask their questions out loud. We'll ask you on the virtual call if you would type in your questions into the chat. And please don't be shy. Feel free to go ahead and do that throughout the discussion if something piques your interest, and we'll go from there. But first of all, I just wanted to thank our sponsors. The Atlanta Global Studies Center, which is a joint center between Georgia Tech and Georgia State, has sponsored this series. It's called Authors Amplified, and the idea is that we amplify the voices of Georgia-based authors who focus on international relations, international affairs, or international business. We've got obviously someone who fits the bill today, and I'll give Kirk and John their due intros in just a moment. Also wanted to thank our host, Constellations. This is where our office, the Global Atlanta Global Headquarters, is located. Constellations community here at 135 Auburn and the center of Sweet Auburn. And also Gene Kansas Commercial Real Estate. Gene is here. Gene runs Constellations and also does a lot, we won't get into, but does a lot around this region in historic preservation and also around the city of Atlanta. So thanks, Gene, for hosting us. Aurora is our producer. You can't see her, but she's working behind the scenes here. You may be able to see her in the overall view, but she is going to drop in Kirk and John's bios, as well as a link to the Atlanta Global Studies Center into the chat, and then we'll go from there. I hope everybody can hear me okay, and I hope I will leave it to Aurora to make sure that happens. So what are we doing today? We're talking about Kirk and John's new book, Rethinking Global Philanthropy, or Reimagining Global Philanthropy, I should say. I've been getting that wrong, and I do think I need to get it right because reimagining is totally different from rethinking. It gets into more of an emotional aspect versus just a strictly mental exercise. But this is a new book that I don't even think you can get on the shelves just yet. I don't know if you want to split, go to split. So now, Kirk, you're on camera. I don't think you can get it on the shelves just yet, can you, Kirk?
Yeah, the official launch is September 7th.
Okay, cool. So those who came in person do have their book copies, and they're going to get them signed, but you're also welcome to order them. We have a few more left, so after the event is over, we'll send out a link where you can buy them through our website, and we'll ship them to you. For lack of a better method, those who are in person will obviously get them today. But I'll give us a brief introduction to Kirk and John. In a nod to their own humility, I think they've kept their bios short and been gracious to me by doing so. Kirk is a professor in the Sam Nunn School of International Affairs at Georgia Tech. He's co-founder and director of the international NGO Rise Up and Care, which we'll talk a lot about. And then he's written many books. My favorite anecdote about Kirk is that he teaches a course called Soccer and Global Politics, which I'm very sad I have not taken. But has also written other books, studied politics, culture, and development across Latin America, and has been very helpful to us at Global Atlanta in connecting with people throughout the region. We've done a series, in Latin America, and Kirk's gotten us into a lot of places we wouldn't have otherwise been able to. And then we've got John Wilcox, and I'll try to pan over to John so you can see him. There he is. John's here with us as well. John's co-author, co-founder and former president CEO of California Republic Bancorp. Current and previous board affiliations include Mechanics Bank, Waterfall Bridge Capital, of course, Rise Up and Care, South Coast Repertory, Junior Achievement, and Fiji Reef Resources, which I think that last one's interesting because I think the two of y'all kind of got into things through the Fiji projects that you were working on.
Exactly.
But we'll talk about that. I'm gonna hand it back over to Kirk and zoom it in a bit, and we'll launch into it. So, and again, thank you to Atlanta Global Studies Center. So where did y'all meet? I mean, talk about the origins of your collaboration and what led to this rethinking that you're having to do. I mean, you note in the book, which I finished last night, so crammed a little bit. You'll notice that the two of you are very upfront about the fact that you don't necessarily agree on everything. You think differently about the world, about politics, I would imagine, about money maybe, I'm not sure. So tell us how the two of you got connected and how this became an interesting project for you.
Yeah, I think that's really one of the main points that we always try to make, because we're a much older generation. We grew up in a time where people who had very different views and perspectives, they would share with each other. And now we live in a time where people are siloed, and anyone who doesn't agree 100% with them, they sometimes just cancel them out. So John and I met in Washington, D.C. in 1983. I worked for a very left-wing group on Latin America, the Council on Hemispheric Affairs, and John worked for the Securities and Exchange Commission, which should automatically make us enemies. And we ended up becoming best friends. He was jealous because I got to wear shorts to the office. He had to wear a jacket every day. So he's getting his revenge now with jeans and a t-shirt. So that started really a lifelong relationship and a lot of conversations. And we've been best friends. Our kids are actually cousins. So
wow.
Yeah, a lot of other things happened along the way. But I started a project through the National Institutes of Health many years ago, and I ran the development part of a drug discovery project in Fiji. And John was on the board of the nonprofits that we started, and we really did the kind of the traditional save the planet philanthropy, where we would come up with these really great ideas, find local stakeholders, go and create these fabulously designed, brilliant new projects, and they all were major failures. And then John is a community banker, and one day he said to me, what you guys do in development is really misguided, because startups, whether they're in Silicon Valley or in Fiji, they fail 90% of the time. And a community bank would never do what we're doing. They would find people who already have an ongoing project that's successful, and then they would, expand that. Yeah. So John had that idea, and it was like a eureka moment for me. And so I got John in a very weak moment on a beach in Crete, and I essentially challenged him to fund a demonstration project on this idea. And that was the beginning of us going and finding the people in Brazil. And yeah.
Well, we'll definitely get into all that. So tell me why you think we got there in the first place, and what is broken about global philanthropy? I mean, you kind of alluded to the startup versus established mentality. I know that's really the center of the book and your model. And so I want to elaborate on that too. But how did you personally encounter these failures? I mean, you're very upfront about those in the book, but also systemically, I guess, what is broken in the philanthropic system as we know it today?
Well, in the United States, we had like two different parts of a critical juncture that led to this particular path. And it was the tax system that encouraged us to start up our own nonprofits. So we have a lot of incentives. Everyone is, 3 degrees connected to some nonprofit, or they've participated themselves, or they've done mission trips or whatever. And all of the incentives, from the university newspapers to your prestige and raises as a professor and your family being proud of you, or even if you look at the philanthropist of Tinder, which is a website, people's dating profiles, all the incentives are to show the world how you are saving the world. And at the university, they come in and you say, you can save the world. You can invent a toilet that will transform Kenya. Yeah. And so all of these incentives are really strong to start our own projects.
Yeah, and you mentioned even alumni magazines are one of the biggest culprits in your view.
Yeah, so it's the tax system, it's the way that we do travel, it's family and church and all of the different organizations that give you a little buzz of dopamine and you feel good about yourself, and they all are applauding you because you're going to go start a girls soccer organization in Cambodia, when there's a existing one led by locals that you just are snuffing out by doing that.
Yeah, but you get a little bit deeper about the problems too, because you talk about what you call the philanthropist's burden, based on the Rudyard Kipling poem, The White Man's Burden, and it's very clear in the book that you see this as kind of almost like a neo-colonial or just colonialist mindset that is carried over. I wonder if you'd elaborate on that and how it manifests itself.
Yeah, so you had the white man's burden that almost all of us would reject formally because it was about colonization, racism, etc. But if you look at the way that we do global philanthropy, it's really just a better version of the same system. Because if you think about, who's going to be the leader, where is the idea going to come from? Who's going to be the superhero? Who's going to get the credit? Who's going to be, on the website? Right. It's always the person from the global north. And when we go to the global south, we look for locals to be our local stakeholder, our sidekick, et cetera. And we really believe that whole model has to be inverted, where the superhero has to be that person in the global south, the leader, the ideas, the innovation, because the kids in those neighborhoods need role models. And they don't need to look like John and I. They need to look like people who look like them. And so that whole white man's burden, and we try to very explicitly show how it's been just simply transformed, but the essence of it remains in modern global philanthropy.
Yeah. Tell us what you mean by global north versus global south for those who don't study these things.
Yeah, so we used to divide the world in the first, second, and third world, and the developed and the undeveloped world. And finally, conceptually and theoretically, it made much more sense to talk about the global north and the global south. And the global south are essentially those countries that have been through the relatively recent colonial experience, right? So they have all of the burden of relatively recent colonization. And so we're in South and Southeast Asia, Latin America, and Africa are largely the global south.
Yeah. Well, so you outline a lot of failures, some successes, but I feel like you are also in the book very conscious of the fact that people's hearts a lot of times are in the right place, that they're not intending to do harm, and you're very clear that you don't want to discourage the impulse, and it's a fine line to walk, because at one sense you're kind of trying to tear down the entire model. On the other side of it, you're saying this can be salvaged. You shouldn't discard what you're feeling when you go to these places, when you participate in a study abroad, when you do a mission trip that may not be as efficient as it should be. You're building something that someone's going to tear down even during the night and rebuild because you're a college student and you don't know how to do masonry, right?
Right.
But at the same time, you want people to hold on to that impulse. So how do you walk that fine line? And is it just a change in mentality, a eureka moment that people have to have just like you did?
Yeah, that's one of the trickiest part, especially when you talk to people who are doing mission trips. And we've participated in all sorts of these activities. But the intention is noble, but the road to hell is paved with good intentions, according to the Irish. So we don't want to stop people having those intentions, but maybe shifting what they're going to do. So there's a minister who just used to lead all sorts of these studies, and he wrote this book, Toxic Charity. And he went through and said, one day I woke up and we were painting a church in Mexico, and it's been painted 6 times in one summer. Yeah. And there are a lot of unemployed painters in that community. Is that really the most efficient thing? And that's why working with John, who's a total career in banking, would say, hey, the resources for global philanthropy are really scarce. And so you really have to get your maximum efficiency out of what you're doing. Is it efficient for a group of high school kids to go and build a building with bricks, and then at nighttime, the people who live in that community tear all the bricks down while the kids are sleeping and redo it because they're not qualified to lay bricks, but they feel really good about themselves? Or is it really efficient to raise a bunch of money from your neighbors and go to India and spend 2 days hugging orphans and then 5 days touring the country? Well, we have to really be, honest, and it's not nice to say, but it's very inefficient, right?
Yeah.
So that's what we think people need to really think about how can they be more efficient? And if we just do something really simple, which is take up our Superman cape and embrace our inner sidekick and really think about how can we support local leaders, then everything kind of resolves itself.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about that and I want to bring John in at the end during the Q&A to talk about the community bank model, because that's really the center of the book. And you talk about two things that you really need. You need to be able to elevate local leaders and let them run the show, and you become the sidekick. And also you need to be relentless about efficiency, and I would assume that's John's influence. But tell us about why you value collaboration on existing projects on the ground and the misperception about the availability of those projects to support.
Okay.
Because you kind of link that back to the philanthropist burden.
Exactly, because you can go to the global south, the favelas of Rio de Janeiro, and you will be shocked about how many innovative, successful, long track record organizations are already on the ground. But because of our social cognitive bias about who are the innovators, who have the good ideas, because we have that pattern that they are people who look like me from a place like Georgia Tech, they become invisible. Not only are they invisible to us from the global north, they're invisible to the people outside of the favelas in the asphalt part of Rio de Janeiro. And so we don't even know that they're there, and they're there by the hundreds in the global south. So that comes from our bias, right? And then John will always say, he repeats over and over, no startups, no startups, no startups. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Not only if it has a 5 or a 10-year track record of success, that leader has weathered so many storms and has so much skin in the game. Second, all of their fixed costs are already covered. So you can bring in a little bit of money, and it doesn't take 2 or 3 years to start something. It's already existing. And so that money has an immediate and a big effect because it's to expand something that's already happening there, right? So that's a huge part of getting more efficiency. And then finally, you are building up this person, their prestige in their community. You're making them even a bigger hero. And that's what these communities need. They need a local hero and a role model that's not the drug dealer or some of the other people that for too long have attracted a lot of the youth in these communities.
Well, can I push back on a little bit? So what about the idea, I'm going in there as a person who has not been to Brazil before. I'm not going to have the language, right? I'm not going to have the understanding. I am going to assume that I can't find them because they're not there, right? So how do you create enough knowledge to get people to the point where they know how to look? Because if these people are hidden even in their own society, how do you uncover them for those who are coming from the outside, or should we?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of different ways to do that. If you don't have any language skills, it's a little bit more tricky that way, but there's all of these organizations like Global Giving, like Rise Up and Care, where you can, for a very small amount of money, support groups that are already vetted, led by locals, right? So that's not that difficult. And you'll also be really surprised how a conversation with a journalist or an existing NGO or a relative or a friend, someone on campus who you know is from a country that you're visiting, these connections happen really fast. And I think that you shouldn't think that it's really that hard. It's really just opening your eyes and seeing what's happening on the ground, because there are some really innovative and impressive local organizations, not only in the niche that we looked at, but in women's issues or in the environment, all over the global south.
And it's way easier to
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Yeah, so I want to talk about that. Like, I think my only experience in a favela was in Rio, in Vidigal. You know, I went up on the side, and that just came through calling a friend of a friend who knew someone on the ground who was a former journalist and took me there. You know?
Yeah.
And I mean, I think that's undervalued. So I really wanted to underscore that, because I've noticed all over the world, if I just call somebody in Atlanta that is connected with that place, generally my experience on the ground in the other place changes completely. I know it's a bit different as a journalist, you get a little bit more access than some people might, but I think the principle is certainly there. And if you're talking about study abroad or any of these entry points, getting into the global compassion industry or whatever you want to call it, that kind of sensibility is very valuable. So tell us about what you uncovered, and what did you expect in Rio, and what did you uncover? And I think it ended up being that you didn't have enough money to fund all the things that you wanted to fund. You had to kind of narrow down. You found more organizations than you ever thought possible. So tell us about some of those, and in particular the Meritus Badminton Association. I'm probably butchering the pronunciation, but
no, that's pretty close. So I had students in Brazil, and we were studying the mega events in the Olympics. And I just put out a little call on LinkedIn, and someone from Switzerland said, you got to go meet this guy who has this badminton organization. I asked around, and people had not heard of this organization. So I took the students down there, and it's a gentleman who was in a juvenile detention center from age 7 to 17, got out, wanted to start an organization for kids, started with swimming, ended up with badminton, took 17 years, built a 4-court badminton center with his bare hands and one friend, started to teach the kids badminton. They didn't do very well. He brought in trainers, and they were doing jumping rope and push-ups, and he said, the kids won't love this. So he came up with a whole methodology of training kids in badminton through samba dancing. And within no time, they're winning all of the tournaments in Brazil. They won the gold medal in the Pan American Games. They've won all sorts of tournaments, traveling the world. 2 were in the 2016 Olympics. 2 of his players were in the 2020 Olympics. And he's transformed this whole community. So I got John to go down there, and Sebastian is just like, natural leader. His hands are like bigger than this book, and he gives you a hug, and you're just like, you're in with whatever he's doing.
Exactly.
He gave John what John would describe as the most expensive hug he ever received. And then the kids will teach you to samba dance and play badminton, and they have little kids up to older kids. Have this whole ladder of success, and he is just a natural genius in innovation and leadership. And so we thought he was like a unicorn. He's got to be the only one in all of Rio de Janeiro. And then we met some other people who took us on a tour of similar groups, and we were just stunned. And we're like, we have more groups than we'll ever have enough money to help. And so we picked some of those groups, mainly as a demonstration project, to see what happens if you just give them money and have a 1-page application and have a 1-page summary at the end of your impact. And it was really impressive and rewarding, and we were sold on the model.
Cool. Well, tell us about how you do evaluation. A big part of philanthropy is knowing that your money is working, right? And you talk about bureaucracy and the way some of the folks that you support would even reject the money if it came with too many stipulations about reporting that we're going to take them away from the mission of what they were doing. Yeah.
So, of course, everyone wants impact for what they're doing, but you have to remember that these people's skills are in, for example, being a circus clown. Our friend Vinicius, he's an amazing circus clown. If he gets $25,000 from the USAID or from a foundation, they want him to do some kind of impact evaluation based on randomized testing models showing the delta or the change from when they got the money to when the year was up on something like high school graduation rates. Well, is something in a year later going to change high school graduation rates? And someone like me with a PhD, I would have a hard time doing that. And so you give these individuals $25,000 and you're asking for $100,000 of time to do something that in the end is just make up a waste of time. There's no value that comes from that. So we developed what we call a harmonious model of impact assessment, where you have places like MIT or Harvard or Georgia Tech, that they do the impact evaluation of what works. And once you know that something works, then it's whether or not they use the money towards that end. And they get to spend their valuable, precious time changing the lives of young people and not filling out a 156-page proposal for $25,000 and then spending 1,000 hours doing the impact assessment at the end.
Well, I've just been shown on the screen that we have 8 minutes left. Apparently this was set up with an incorrect link, so we only have the 40-minute window. So I'm going to go to questions from the audience first, and then after this gets cut off, I really apologize, but unfortunately I don't think there's a way to reconnect. So we're going to get the audience questions first, and then we'll go to the virtual questions first, and we'll go to the in-person folks. And I'm sorry, y'all will have to be out for that one, unfortunately, but we plan to get out of here at 11:15 and be done anyway, or 12:15. So I'm going to go ahead and read from here if there are some questions. Are there not any yet? Yeah, so we got a few comments. One, I'll read the comments. We've got he's, I guess, talking about the philanthropist burden. Carla says, you can apply the same concept to philanthropy within our borders. We tend to do the community work with the view that wealthy, white, educated groups go into minority settings with an attitude of salvation instead of supporting existing groups. And that was actually one question I had too. You know, we're here in Sweet Auburn. There's all this discussion about racial equity now that's after the George Floyd killing and all that. So how do we, are there lessons for US-based organizations that are doing philanthropy in a place like Atlanta? And what can we glean from that?
Well, I think the same lesson applies in that the organic local organizations are going to have the best long-term success. And I think the comment was really spot on. Yeah, and another person says wealthy groups are extremely out of touch with the actual struggles of the community that they're supposed to be helping. And so, yeah, that gets at education, right? How do we, and really I felt reading through the book, y'all can tell me if I'm wrong, it felt like it was all about humility. Like, if you're humble enough to not be the superhero and be the sidekick, then really that's the kind of core ingredient to success. Is that I think if you just have two lessons, that's one, embrace your inner sidekick. And the other one, which John will always say,
no startups.
No startups.
All right, so we got one from Dory.
There's all kinds of local superheroes in Atlanta and Orange County, California. There's always in every community these people who go above and beyond and really do the heavy lifting in the community. If you just find those people and leverage them, and your money will do great.
Cool. So Dory asked, how do you see the culture of being innovators above all at Georgia Tech changing to take into account understanding problems first and learning from community leaders? I really feel like that's an important question because of your talk about your discussion in the book about the cult of technology, right? The idea that we can just solve, if we throw enough technology and innovation, that something will solve it, and we leave out the human aspect of it.
Yeah, well, there's all sorts of innovation. Danny Bresnes has a new book on innovation that I really strongly recommend. And he, like many people, have said that when we have social problems, we have this cognitive social bias that every solution is an app or some kind of technological, and we never even consider what are the social innovation. Right? You think about innovation.
You said process in the book. Instead of product, it's process.
Process innovation. And I think we go back, because this is an example that we've already talked about, Sebastian. Teaching your kids to play badminton with samba dancing, that's innovation, right? and it had no technology.
Right.
And so I think that, technology does really wonderful things, but we have to open our minds and say, okay, what are the other alternatives?
Yeah.
And maybe it is technology as the solution, but it shouldn't be the first and only
Right.
option.
Yeah. And Lucia Jennings from VA Brazilian American Chamber, thanks Lucia for this question, because I was going to get into this as well. She says, thank you for your work and love for Brazil. How do you define success for your project or measure success? And I think this is another important point, because you really hit hard on the startups, right? Like y'all say, 90% of the startup projects are not successful in achieving their initial goals. But how is that even measured? And like, doesn't it depend on what you were trying to achieve in the first place? And if you change the goals, don't you get more success, So are you being too hard on startups? And then how did you determine success in your own enterprises that you supported?
Well, you can measure the success of the startups because they either disappear or what we call zombie projects. So that's pretty easy to see, the failure rate of these projects. So what we believe, and it goes to our measurement of impact, is that we already know certain things that work, and the science and the research is really strong. If you get young people in marginalized neighborhoods heavily involved in high performance activities that become their new addictions. We talk a lot about the research in Iceland. We won't go into it here, but the research is overwhelming. That if you get these kids involved in high level performance activities that they're doing multiple times a week, that have rewards and competition and this series of things that come with high level performance, whether it's circus or art or chess or girls robotics, etc., then you don't have to measure if that's going to be successful for them, because that's already been shown by the research.
Yeah.
So our success is they give us a one-page application, say we're going to take 100 more kids to tournaments this year with this money. Then they go to the tournaments, they send us photos and videos of all the kids at the tournament, all the buses leaving to the tournament, and a year later they say this is where this money was spent.
Right.
That is success.
So we got 2 minutes. Hand the mic to John because I want to get what's the core of the community bank model for success in philanthropy.
I mean, the core with all that is to find the local superheroes, and what that really means is find people with great character. Be it in banking or be it in philanthropy, if you find those superheroes who do what they say they're going to do. They say they're going to take the 100 kids to the tournament. They do take the kids, 100 kids. If you're a banker and they say you're going to use the money to buy a piece of equipment and they actually buy the piece of equipment, that's how you really determine the level of success. And, in banking, you look at how long that person has been in business, what the trends are. You look at the person who is a character. We talked earlier about how do we find these people. I started a bank. I found most of my customers through referrals. Yeah. One person tells me one thing and the other person gives me the other thing. It's the same way we've identified these people in the focus. And
it's what? No
startups.
Okay, good.
Find already existing there's many of them. It's shocking, but there are. And just your impact just goes way up. And as somebody who likes to donate and help people, you want the greatest bang for your buck.
Well, thanks everybody that came virtually. I think we're gonna run out of time, but see y'all soon. I think we'll probably just go ahead and cut it off, and we will be